back to the subject of reaction. Walter brought out that reaction and faith go right together. Faith, your faith, the degree of faith is shown by your reaction. If you have faith that God is the principle of the universe, you won't react to the appearances of discord. In proportion as you would react to them with fear, doubt, and so forth, you'll be showing how little faith you had in God's ability to govern God's own universe. Not only that, but you would also have little faith in God as a God. If you really could accept all the sin, disease, and death that we see on earth, certainly you can't have much faith in God. Therefore, once you have seen that human experience is more or less an appearance, and more especially its discordant angles is an appearance or a temptation, then never could you say you had faith in God if you reacted with fear and doubt to your patient's claims, or your student's claims, or the world's claims, you see? Now, as some of you know, we have been given the opportunity of doing some of this work in capital union, capital and labor work, and in every case, and one of it was in Los Angeles, one in San Francisco, and the other. In every case, the principle has been the same. You see, it would be very easy to react with a great venom against some of these labor leaders. And it would be very easy to react with a fear of their power or a hatred for their modes and means of action. But in each case, the overcoming came in the same way, with no reaction to the personalities involved. Now, in two of the cases, the personalities of both sides were pretty bad. The personalities involved with both sides weren't above reproach. It isn't as if you had a case of a very virtuous side and a very devilish side, but you had the case of probably both sides seeking their own ends at anybody else's expense. That's always what you're dealing with in capital and labor. You're not dealing with a good side and a bad side. You're dealing with both sides trying to gain their end, and in very many cases, not too unwilling to get the best of the bargain. So if you went into a capital and labor case with any feeling that one side was right, you'd lose all your effectiveness right away. If you had any sympathies with either side, you'd lose right away. There's only one way to go into that case, and that is knowing that Christ is the only identity, and what you're seeking is only a spiritual good. Now, if the one that engaged you wants to lose, that's his business. You are engaged only for the purpose of bringing forth a spiritual good, not satisfying anybody's human sense of what constitutes their good. Well, now, so you are when you come to the arts, whether it is writing or painting or acting. You can't have any interest in whether the person succeeds financially or even whether they succeed artistically, because what may be an artistic success in one age may not be in another age. So you can't be here for the purpose spiritually of making their art recognized. As a matter of fact, their art may be a generation ahead of its time. And what are you going to do about that? You can't gain recognition for it ahead of its time. So your interest is not in the success of the actor, the writer, the artist. Your interest only is in bringing forth a spiritual activity, a spiritual relationship. I have had people write to me on marital things and say that, you know, there is only one, and a separation is impossible. No, I don't see that at all. Sometimes a separation is very spiritual. What God hath not joined together, it's much better to have asunder. Oh, they don't see that. They think that our work is to be sure that there's going to be no separation or divorce. That's not our work. Our work is to bring out spiritual harmony in the individual's case. Now, if spiritual harmony can only be achieved through separation or divorce, let's have it. Don't try to yoke together two unmated objects. There's nothing spiritual. That might be the work of a marriage counselor. That might be the work of a lawyer or a magistrate's court. A divorce court, a divorce judge. It may be his function to keep couples mated together even if they're going to black each other's eyes every day. That may be their function. But that isn't our function. Our function is a realization of God's government in individual life. Now, if your life is led out in that direction and your mate's life in that, that's the way it's got to be spiritually. Because if you're going to use God to gain your particular end, then you are not willing to be transformed into the spiritual image and likeness of God. If you are not willing to leave mother, brother, sister, father for my sake in whatever way it's revealed, then what's the use of pretending that the object is to follow God? The object really is to get God to follow us. No. In every case, watch this, whether you're dealing with business deals, business conferences, real estate sales, capital and labor, marital cases, never enter the case humanly. Never permit yourself to give human advice. Never permit yourself to have a desire to see one side or the other win, not even the side that hires you. That is not your function. Your function is to be still in Christ and let Christ's will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Don't react to the appearances and never desire to change appearances. Never desire to change appearances. Always be willing to let God deal with the appearances. And the only way you can do that is not to react to the appearance, and that shows your faith. That shows your faith in God's ability to govern God's own universe. That shows your faith in God's ability to know your need before you have knowledge of your need. Don't question it. Don't question it. Don't look at your demonstration day by day to see how it's progressing, because it may be just like the fruit trees after the crop's been harvested. If you're going to look the next day for the next harvest, you're showing your lack of faith that something's going on inside. You have to wait and let maturity bring to light. Let God have its perfect work, and then let the fruit come in its own time. Don't judge your demonstration day by day. Don't judge that of your patient. You do not know what transformation of consciousness they are going through. Now, you know, Saul of Tarsus had a tremendous illumination on the road to Damascus. But it was 9 years later before he went out on his missionary work. He struggled down in Arabia for 9 years with what had been revealed to him. Why? Saul was a good Jew. He was a very good Hebrew, well taught. And here he has a revelation which throws it upside down. It is like some of our students when I say God is in power, or when I say don't turn to God for anything. They'll say, oh, you've taken my God away from me. Yes, I've taken their old concept of God away from them. And now for a while they're going to have to struggle until they can fill this new dimension in, fill in this new area of consciousness, and perceive what I'm trying to say about is. God is, that's enough. Go about your business. Don't react to appearances. No, they have been taught to pray to God to do something. They have been taught to tell God our needs. And now I show them a new dimension. You don't think for a minute they can understand it that day. You don't think for a minute they can go out and preach it the next day. No, there is a year of an internal struggle. There are years of an internal struggle. It was one of the strangest things that ever happened. When I first went to Maui and I taught this message, I'm sure that the reaction was that here is a crazy man. And the only reason they allowed me to come the second time was because Jesse Hartley brought me and stuck me down their throat. She says, you're going to take this and you're going to like it. And she made them buy pamphlets, or she gave them pamphlets mostly, and books. They wouldn't buy anything so crazy as this. No, she gave them away. She paid the bills and gave them away. Not many copies were sold in those early days, but she was going to see that the infinite way got across, or else. And so she kept bringing them back and bringing them back. Well, I knew right well they weren't understanding anything I was saying. That was as clear as could be that they weren't. But they were patient with me, and I was patient with them. And now we have a group there who really are commencing to see things and do things. But look what transformation had to take place between their old idea of some kind of a God that if you just could reach would do something, and what they're commencing to perceive now is that they must not react to appearances but stand firm in the faith that God is, and that's enough for me to know. Do you see what a transformation that is? Do you see what a thing that is? And that is why even when students have spiritual illumination, it doesn't always follow that they're going to understand it right away, because in the background is all of that orthodoxy. And, well, you mean to tell me it doesn't make any difference if we violate Sabbath, or if we don't go to church, or if we don't have a holiday? And then the Christian Scientists and unity, well, you mean it'll be all right if we don't keep on making affirmations and recite this and recite that? Oh, to give up that old way of life is not the matter of a moment. It really isn't. I can remember to this minute the shock that came to me. I was sitting at my desk in Boston when the voice said, God is not mind. Mind is a reasoning faculty. Here I'd been taught always that God is mind. Of course, I know now that God isn't mind. We can say God is mind with a capital M, but what we're really saying is God is God. But actually God isn't mind. The mind of us is an instrument that God uses. God isn't even soul. God isn't even spirit. Nobody knows what God is. If you could name it, it wouldn't be that. God, whatever God is, operates through our soul and in our spirit and in our mind. We don't know what God is. We don't know what electricity is. How can we know what God is? Nobody knows what God is. It's an impossibility. The only thing you can say about it is that the greater degree of silence you attain, the more of God you'll feel, but that doesn't mean you'll be able to know what God is. At least I'm going to tell you that as far as I'm going, I don't know what God is. I know nothing about God except that if I'm still enough, something operates in my soul, in my mind, in my spirit, and even in my body. But what it is that's operating, or what its mode of operation, I don't know anything like that. And I do know that the only mode of contacting it is in silence. Not in speech, not in thoughts. Nobody, by taking thought, can contact God. You can take thought and you can think to lead you up to a point in consciousness, but before you'll contact God, there must come, even if it's a split second, of silence. And then God fills your whole soul and mind and body and consciousness, but it still doesn't tell you what God is. But one thing we know, that after we've had that taste or touch, we don't know that God is. After that, there's no doubt about it. And so now you can throw all these appearances up against us and let them come. And they'll break, just like hitting them on a rock, if you stand there without reaction. And that's your faith, that's the evidence of your faith, your ability not to react to appearances. Please. And good morning.
Good morning.
We can't forget our greeting to our unseen friends. Now, I'll read you portions of a letter and give you just an idea of this very thing that we're talking about. I meditated last night, 10 p.m. our time, and will write down what came to me. Most of the time I meditate lately, there is just a silence, and not much comes, but it lets me know when the meditation is over. Now that shows right there that there's a contact, you see. Nothing is happening in the conscious mind, but an instruction is going on in the soul. I sit in quiet until I am told that that is all this time. Go and sin no more. Never believe in a selfhood apart from God. In thy silence I shall come to you. When faced with any problem, be not afraid, it is I. This is the voice speaking in this person's soul. Okay? When faced with any problem, be not afraid, it is I. Now, we don't think of a problem as being God, do we? Neither did the disciples at sea think the storm was God. They thought it was a problem. But the Master says, be not afraid, it is I. Right? Nothing can come nigh your dwelling place but God. But it might appear in some form that you think of as evil. But that's only because these generations of human belief have made you believe there is good and evil. But supposing you were to be able to catch the foundational point of the infinite way, that there's only one power, could anything ever appear to you as evil? Wouldn't you always know it as I? Isn't that the whole secret of the infinite way, that we don't have a God that can do something for us? Because we don't have an evil that has to have anything done to it. We have a God who is infinite. We have a creative principle that is good. We have an effect called a spiritual universe, which is always harmonious. We have a cosmic law governing all creation. So do we need a God to do something for us? What would it do it to? What is the story of David and Goliath? I don't need a suit of armor because there is no evil power. Do you see? No. When you are faced with any phase of discord, aren't you being faced with God, which you are wrongly interpreting through your thousands of years of human consciousness? All right. Here our student is told, when faced with any problem, be not afraid. It is I. It's one of the greatest lessons there is in the infinite way. I, God, am the solution to all problems. This isn't your understanding or mine. I, God, am the solution to all problems. We're the instrument through which that power operates. Now wait. Universal truth is God. All plant life, animal life, and man are alive. The life of each is God, as it is true about all. All one life in all. The earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof. I don't know which pages are. Until all truth is revealed to us, so that we understand, we will be searching. Until all truth is revealed to us, so that we understand, we will be searching. Yes, we are seekers of truth. The Bible is our warehouse to find what is stored therein. It was after 11 p.m. when I was through meditating. I was going to get up and go to bed, but I was told to sit quietly as it was not time yet. So I obeyed, and then some minutes later I was told, that is all for now. What happened in that interval? A further enlightenment took place in the soul. The Spirit itself operated. Do you see? Didn't have to touch consciousness. It took place in the soul. The activity of truth in our consciousness is that which goes before us to make the crooked places straight. When we neither fear, love, nor hate any appearance, see, the student's been catching our work here, we are on the middle path. When we neither fear, love, nor hate any appearance, that is, when we no longer react to any appearance, we are on the middle path. If we could abide in the secret place of the Most High at all times, we would never be disturbed by the things of the world, since my kingdom is not of this world. You see that? Now, that whole thing is, again, the point of reaction, isn't it? All right? When the appearance of evil brings out a reaction, that merely represents an intermediary step on our path and means that we must wait for that which immediately comes to assure us, you see, and then that's done. The ultimate of our experience will be when we do not in any wise react. Now, there is only one way in which we can come to the place of not reacting. And Starkey brought this out not many days ago in an observation that he made of my work. I am not concerned about people. When anything's presented to me, I don't worry about them. I go to find what the principle is. You see? It isn't the person or the condition that I care about. It's what is the principle that's concerned. Now, there's a great deal of overcoming humanhood in that, because there are some people at first that you love to do this for, and some that get you pretty angry. There are some that you have personal feelings about. There are some that you have personal feelings against, that rub you the wrong way. But you say, oh, what's the use? Or what are they going to do with it after they get it? There's a great rising to where we don't care who gets the benefit or what they do with it. What concerns us is the principle. Now, that's a matter of training, you see. It's a matter of training so that the person doesn't bother you, the claim doesn't bother you, the appearance doesn't bother you, but the principle does, because you don't instantly perceive the principle, you see. And that is where your struggle comes in, to perceive the principle. But ignore the person, ignore the circumstance, get to the principle, and then sometimes the secret about that person will be revealed. Now, I'm going to revert for a moment to the healing ministry itself. Almost all of the sins and diseases of the world are the result of universal belief. For instance, a person sits in a draft and catches cold. Now, that has nothing to do with them. That has to do with a universal belief. There is a universal medical belief that sitting in a draft will give you a cold. There is another person who gets around germs and then gets infected. That has nothing to do with them. That has to do with a universal medical law of infection and contagion. You see that? There is another person who has a fear of their future, of security. It has nothing to do with them. It's a universal belief, and they may have taken it on through being in an environment, in a family who were always concerned about and fear of spending a dollar. But there's another person who goes to the other extreme and is wasteful and throws it away because also of a universal belief or an environmental belief. You see that? Now, none of this has anything to do with your patient. It has to do with a universal belief. Now, when you are confronted with problems, It is a very good thing to remember that this has nothing to do with this person. This is a universal belief. But a universal belief isn't a power. A universal belief, I mean, there may be a universal belief that the earth is flat, but that belief can't make the world flat. Do you see that? It can't do anything. And it can't have any penalty except in the person who accepts it. So, one with God being a majority, when your patient comes to you with some claim which is of the nature of a universal belief, just your realization, this has nothing to do with my patient. This is just a universal belief, and it has no power. It can't inflict itself. And right now, I nullify any seeming effect from a universal belief. Now, that is why I say that a practitioner can meet probably 75% of all their cases with nothing more than that realization. There's nothing more they have to do about it. It's just that. It's a universal belief. It isn't a power. It isn't a presence. It hasn't any law. Goodbye. Now, there are some of our ills that come through theology. The church, just by having services Sunday and Wednesday, causes 25% of all the diseases on the earth. Why? They are continuously instilling in the minds of their congregations a fear of sin and penalty. So that a person, an ordinary church person, may not be stealing anything. They may not be committing adultery. But the church has got them so filled with a complex because they weren't here last Sunday, or they didn't receive communion, or they didn't read the Bible, or they didn't contribute enough to the new building, that everybody in the world that goes to church has got a guilt complex about something. And it is that guilt complex that operates in their consciousness, and the first thing you know, it gives them a nervous upset, or it gives them hives, or it produces something in there, because inwardly they're hiding from the world their guilt and fearing the penalty for it. Do you see that? Now, as a matter of fact, that's rubbish. There isn't any God that demands that you support a church. There isn't any God that demands that you keep a Sabbath. As a matter of fact, if there were, then every Christian is guilty, because before the Hebrews, there was no Sabbath. They made Saturday a Sabbath. And so if you observe Sunday, you're violating Sabbath. Saturday is really Sabbath. You see that? Now, as a matter of fact, there actually was no Sabbath before the Hebrew people. They set aside one day a week, which happens to have been Saturday. You see that? If they violate Saturday, they're violating Sabbath. Well, now the Christians adopted the old Hebraic teaching of a Sabbath. It isn't a Christian teaching, as I will prove to you in a minute. It is a Hebrew teaching. Only they changed the day. With the result now that if you don't observe Sunday, you're violating the Sabbath. So now you've got a guilt complex about Sunday. But is there a reason for that? Why, all you have to do is go back to the Christian master. Man was not made for the Sabbath. Sabbath was made for the man. You can have Sabbath anytime you want it. Just set aside a minute to consecrate yourself to God, and you're observing Sabbath. Just set aside an hour every day of the week to consecrate yourself to God, and you're having Sabbath. Or if you'd prefer it, set aside one day of the week and give up all your family obligations and business obligations and spend the day in the country. Take your favorite book, your favorite Bible, and sit there and commune with nature, with God, and you're having your Sabbath. Or, if you can't do that, take a weekend every month. If you can't do that, take 40 days once a year. That's your Sabbath. Now, the only violation of a Sabbath is if you don't have some time of consecration. You are violating Sabbath. But it isn't necessarily Saturday or Sunday, nor does Sabbath have to be spent in a church. Again, I give you the Christian teaching. Remember, I didn't make this up. It is Jesus who reminded us of this, that no longer shall you worship in this holy mountain, nor yet in Jerusalem, in that temple down there, but in spirit and in truth. Now, you are violating the Sabbath if you don't have your special moments, and it might be just 2 minutes a day, of consecrating yourself, communing with God, do you see? But if you're a churchgoer, you're not told that. You're told, where were you Sunday? Why didn't you get a communion on Communion Sunday? Have you been baptized? And now you didn't, and so you've got a guilt complex. And you carry that around with you as if 10 years ago you had stolen $10 when you needed it, and that's still preying on your mind. Do you see that? Now, the fact that people are carrying these guilt complexes are appearing outwardly as some form of discord, because they are under the belief that if they weren't disobeying these man-made laws, that they'd be healthy. And that isn't true. You can do the daily lesson and still be sick. You can go to church, you can tithe, you can do anything you want and still be sick. And then what's the answer? Well, you must have some secret sin. Read Job again and you'll see. They could tell him that he was outwardly righteous, but he must have a secret sin. Or maybe you didn't worship God this way, or maybe you missed the Sabbath. He knew that all that was wrong. He knew that so far as the letter of truth was concerned, he was abiding by it. You see? But only when he came to see that God doesn't make these rules, and I'm not in bondage to these rules, only then could he get free. And so it is with us. If we, and we do, entertain some belief that we have been in violation of a law of God, we have a guilt complex. And usually it isn't a violation of God. It's a violation of some man-made law. Because remember, the Hebrew has a different law to live up to than the Christian. The Christian has a different law than the Buddhist. Yet each one has a guilt complex for breaking a law that isn't bothering the other fellow at all. See that? Now, the practitioner should first of all realize that whatever it is that's causing this thing with the patient, it's usually a universal belief. And that will take care of most of it. If not, some superstitious belief carried around inside, which must be seen as no power, some theological belief. It must be seen as no power. Now, there is the third experience, and that is the individual who is a victim of something that they themselves are clinging to. Now, we must not try to use psychology to heal them. We mustn't even try to discover what their secret fault is. What we must do is get inside in the realization, no matter what the human claim may be, no matter what the human cause of the disease is, it isn't a power. It isn't a presence. It cannot bind the child of God. It cannot bind the spiritual offspring of God. Do you see what I mean? And so we get inside with that, always coming back to our one power again. Now then, with that first realization, you bring out a lot of healings. With a second, a few that didn't respond to that. With a third, a few that didn't respond to that. And now we still have some that don't clear up after all that. Then there's one sure thing. Forget all that. Go into the silence until God speaks. In that, you see, this kind goeth not out, but by prayer and fasting. And the secret of that statement is this. This last kind won't go out with anything that you'll know, or anything that you'll do. It'll only go out if you can get still enough inside to let the Spirit do the work. Then the Spirit touches your patient's consciousness and sets them free. There is always that. Now you say, why not do it in the beginning? Well, what comes up about that is the time element. You see, as you go on and get busy in this work, so many demands are made on you, either for healing, for teaching, for letter writing to people at a distance, that you can't just sit down with every single person that comes along and wait to make that contact for them. And so you let this first realization take care of it. Then if it doesn't respond to that, your second realization. And if it doesn't respond to that, third. If you see you've really got something that isn't responding, then you might have to take a day off. You may have to decide to make a pot of coffee and stay up all night. You see, many and many a time, I've had to even go away for 2 and 3 days and say, I'm going to stick with this until God brings forth the answer. You see? And you're led in one way or another to do that which is right. I had a case over there, and it just was not responding. Okay? And I wasn't getting anywhere. And I knew it. I could feel it. But when I came there, I spoke to a member of the family and said, let us meditate together. And we had quite a long meditation. And in that meditation came the freedom, and I said, it's all right, the work is done. And that afternoon we had a telephone call. Things have changed. You see that? This kind goeth not out but by prayer and fasting. And so when I sat in the silence with a member of the family who perhaps may have permitted fear to come in or doubt, but whatever the reason, when we two together went to God, 2 or more gathered together, we broke this mesmeric sense. Do you see that? Now, I never know how that's going to come about. Sometimes I have a case where I know I've got to sit up all night. Then sometime during the night, the thing breaks. At other times, I've even gone away and left no forwarding address for 24 hours or 48 hours. Just hidden away, meditated, lied down, took a nap, meditated, ate a bite, went and took a cold shower, came back and meditated, ate a bite, rested, slept, just kept it going and kept it going until it broke through. Then the thing was broken. Do you see? This kind goeth not out but by prayer and fasting. It means that there's no use trying to think thought. There's no use trying to know a truth. This kind won't respond to anything you know. This kind will not respond to anything but the action of God itself. So you might as well get inside and make your contact. You see? I have had that experience several times with people who are passing on. Nothing would bring about a response. And so I went into this silence and went deep and deep and deep and deep until I was able to contact their very soul and then brought them back. Well, this kind goeth not out but by prayer and fasting. It's just a matter of me and my relationship to God, me and my contact with God. If I can make that contact powerfully enough, it brings God, then it will meet any situation. That will raise right from the dead, you see. He had an experience of that kind in Boston with a woman who medically had been pronounced dead and who had been covered up. Right? And then the family asked for help. And in 25 minutes, that patient came back, and the very first time that they could speak, they said, "Why did you bring me back?" It was so beautiful. And a strange thing happened with that person, too. They were at that time 79 years of age and wanted to go, and yet were brought back. And for a long time after that, for years, this lady would say, "Oh, Joel, why don't you let me go? I have no need of being on earth. I'm blessing nobody on earth. Why don't you let me go?" Well, it wasn't that I humanly determined they were going to stay. It was that the Spirit in me would not let loose of them. And finally, when I moved to California, this woman said to her daughter, "Now I'll be able to go. The minute he gets out of the way, I can go." I wasn't away a week till she passed on. Right? She freed herself from what that thing was holding her. Now, there's no death, you see. She knew by then there was no death, because she was conscious even after she passed on that she was in a very beautiful experience. And she wanted to return to that experience, which she couldn't grasp here on earth. Probably a younger person might have come and said to me, "Now look, you've shown me what life eternal is. let me enjoy that same thing here that I was there, and then they could have been taught this consciousness. But with her it was too late for her to have grasped a whole new thing, and she experienced it in her ongoing. Do you see that? No. We can give all the explanations we like about healing work, and the only thing we can say about them is this. On the whole, we're suffering from a universal belief, not from any personal act of sin or art. Even in the case with the woman with syphilis who had committed adultery, it still wasn't her sin. Even the sin was a universal belief of being a young woman, that's all. That's all. She wouldn't have committed adultery if her husband had been a young man and could have lived a normal life with her. So the only reason she committed adultery was not for sinful purposes, because she was a young person and had to fulfill herself. Now then, the healing of the syphilis came about through only one realization. You haven't sinned. This is a universal belief. The disease was a universal belief of infection. The thing which brought on the disease was a universal belief of being young. Do you see that? And she was completely clear. There was nothing personal about that. All right. On the whole, then, we can say that most of the ills of the world are because of a universal belief over which we have no control. Except now, as we know, that they aren't power and they aren't law. That gives us our control. The patient has no control over it. The minute they go into an infected area, they'll come out with an infection. Until they learn what we have learned, that infection and contagion have no law to support them. Then we can go a step further and say we know that where it isn't a universal thing like that, it may be a specific religious teaching that's binding them. Superstitious theology. You see that? And we can set them free if that's binding them. And then we can go a step further if it isn't that, and we can go into this silence and just get the release of God. You see? Eventually we develop such a state of consciousness that just our presence is a release to whatever's bothering them. Now, this all may be true, and the evidence would seem to make it so. But supposing it isn't so, what difference does it make? We still have recourse to the one thing that is true, that's God contact. If none of this is true, and if none of this heals anybody, then go inside. And when you make the God contact, you'll have the healing. In the beginning, you may have to have this spiritual contact with God many, many times. Later, you'll only have to have it in those extreme cases where this kind goeth not out but by prayer and fasting. Now, death is a universal degree of such intensity that wherever you come up against a case that is in danger of death, or that a great fear of death exists, you may not meet it at all until you do separate yourself from the world and get in there and get the feel of that contact. You must see this. On the whole, what we know about truth isn't a power. It just satisfies our human sense of things. In the last analysis, if there were a way to do this without breeding a false faith, a superstitious faith, I would be perfectly willing to take some students, and I've promised myself, and I've promised a few students that someday I'm going to do it for them. Take them aside in a special class and say to them, I'm going to tell you the truth. There is no truth that we know that's true. There's nothing that we know about the truth that's true. Because if it were, it would free everybody. Because truth really will free. So let us come to a point where we're willing to forget all the truth we ever knew, and never use truth or think of truth in connection with a case. Just let us agree that no matter what the appearance is, there's no way we can do anything about it, but get inside and make the God contact, and then let it do it. And then you will see that that is the ultimate secret of healing. You see, there has never been a time in my life when I have used a truth or treatment for healing work. Because actually, my healing practice was begun before I knew any truth. And the way the healings were brought about was a sitting in the silence until this click came, and they were freed. But I didn't know what did it. I didn't know how. I didn't know what was behind it. So came my studies. Now, one of the first things that I learned in the practice was that no person is responsible for their diseases. I don't care what their sins. I don't care what their errors. All metaphysics is wrong when it says that you must find out what sin your patient or what wrong thought your patient. Don't ever believe that. All of their discords come from a universal belief, which just by virtue of being a human being we're victims of. So there is no such thing as being concerned about your patient's belief. See that? So I separated myself from all theological teachings. I don't care about a patient. All I know is a universal belief is responsible. Then I found that some cases didn't respond, even when they practiced from that standpoint. And so I saw in a few cases that their own theology was holding them back. They would think, I'm doing the daily lesson, and it ought to free me. I'm going to church regularly. I'm tithing regularly. And then I saw why all that was superstitious belief. You can't get healed if you fulfilled all of that. The only way you can get healed is to know that disease isn't a reality. Not that there's some power or some goodness or some virtue on your part that will free you. Do you see that? That gave me that second clue. There were still some that didn't respond to that. Well, with them, it was evident that there was some personal thing they were clean, or some terrible fear of insecurity, or some terrible fear of an old religious thing, like in Catholicism, the fear that you'll go to hell if you deviate, so forth. And, or the Hebrews. There's a saying among Jews that once a Jew, always a Jew. In other words, a person might change from being a Jew to a Christian, but when they come to their deathbed, they're going to want a rabbi. There's an old superstition back there that you can't get away ever from being a Jew. Do you see what I mean? Now, a lot of healings may come this way, but so far as I'm concerned, I wouldn't want to waste time with it. To me, there's only one thing. Get back and contact the Spirit. Now, if I can have a practitioner, or a little group of practitioners, who would be willing to forget all the truth they know. Say, yes, that's true on the relative level. It's true there's a universal belief. It's true this and that. It's even true that God is the only power. But will you tell me what good it does anybody that God is the only power? What good is it to know that God is the only power? Aren't all these other powers operating? Even though you say they're not powers, they're beliefs, aren't they still operating? Sure. Now, if you do your healing work from the standpoint of paying no attention to your patient, realize it's only a universal belief, so forth and so on, that's fine. But someday, you'll hit up against a case that will make you acknowledge that there isn't any truth that's true. And there isn't anything you could know that's true. And there isn't anything you can know that's going to save your patient. And when you get to that last desperate place, and I've been there, Daisy, a lot of times, when you get to there, you'll say, what is there to do? And then the answer will come, get back into me. Then when you get back there and the surge of God comes, then something takes place. Well, you say, I might as well do that in the beginning. Yes, so far as I'm concerned, I'd be tickled pink if you'd even refuse to say there's a universal belief. If you wouldn't respond with a human mind, that would mean that there's no reaction. Then you can say, well, then I'll take every case from the standpoint of prayer and fasting. I'll pray and I'll fast from every human statement of truth. You see? Now, so far as I'm able, that's the way my practice is conducted. I have to teach these things because it leads people up to the higher state of consciousness, but I long for the day when I can have a group that I can say, let me confess, there isn't any truth that's true. There isn't anything you can know that's true. The only truth there is a complete refraining from truth. A complete going back into the kingdom of God and letting the Father take over. Let the Spirit flow through you. Because if there's a truth that's true, there's something you and I are responsible for. You see? Now, there is a need that we take first steps first. That is why the Master has given us things like the 5th, 6th, and 7th chapters of Matthew, so that we can purify first our human sense of selfhood, so that we are not guilty of a lot of human error. You see? He gives us that so that we're not guilty of lying about our neighbor and cheating in business and committing adultery, cheating in the human relationships and taking our good at somebody else's expense. He has given us teachings like that in order to purify ourselves humanly. But actually, he has given us 2 cosmic laws. All right, well, we're going to change it over, huh? All right.